Hi, I'm Femi Oke.
And I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream.
Today, who can solve Cameroon's Anglophone crisis? We will look at its impact and ask whether an upcoming election could change the situation.
Cameroonians online have been pitching this topic to us almost daily. So you too can join this conversation today, live on YouTube or via Twitter.
In Cameroon, violence between Anglophone separatists and government forces has killed at least 400 people this year, and more unrest is expected ahead of the country's October 7 presidential election. English-speaking separatists are attempting to prevent Sunday's vote from taking place in the country's northwest and southwest regions. Anglophone residents there say they have long suffered marginalisation by Cameroon's Francophone majority.
Protests by teachers and lawyers starting in 2016 helped prompt renewed calls for the establishment of an independent state of Ambazonia for Anglophone residents. Demonstrations have grown into armed conflict, while tens of thousands are now internally displaced or have fled to neighbouring countries. Online, Cameroonians are sharing news and often gruesome images using the hashtags Ambazonia and Free Southern Cameroons.
So with us to talk about all of these issues, Edward Gang is an organiser with the Ambazonia People's Restoration Movement. In Douala, Cameroon, Kawala, president of the opposition Cameroon People's Party, and in 2011 she was the first woman to run for president in Cameroon. And in Abuja, Nigeria, Al Jazeera reporter Ahmed Idris, who's been following the story. Now, before we start, I have to say that we did actually set up the Minister of Information for Cameroon to be on the programme. He agreed to be on the programme. We were in a back and forth on the telephone, and then he stopped responding to us. So we do not have a government voice in this conversation unless you want to jump on Twitter at AJStream. Cameroonian government, you're very welcome to be part of this conversation. We'd love you to be. Malika.
The people that are jumping on Twitter to direct their thoughts to this stream are people like Young Blaze. He is a freelance journalist based in Cameroon, and he talks to us about the atmosphere there right now.
It's been 2 years since the conflict began here in Anglophone Cameroon, and I think this year is very significant because the amount of destruction, the amount of villages, properties that have been burned down, destroyed, both by the military and the militia, is alarming, and the people in Anglophone Cameroon are living in fear. The streets are deserted. We've seen in the past weeks as people have fled to other parts of Cameroon, the French parts of Cameroon. We also know there is a large number of Cameroonian refugees in Nigeria. We have other people staying in bushes here in Cameroon. The streets are full of fear. When you walk through the streets of Bamenda, Boya, Kumba, and all the parts of Anglophone Cameroon, you get the sense that there is fear everywhere.
With fear everywhere, describing the tense atmosphere there, how do you have an election campaign?
Well, I think the Biya government is one of the few governments in the world who would organize an election in these circumstances. And that's one of the reasons that our party, the Cameroon People's Party, has taken the decision not to run in this election, because you have just mentioned the situation is horrific. We have close to 1,000 people dead. We have, at this moment, at least 300,000 displaced from the Northwest and Southwest, at least, because people are right now leaving in droves out of fear for the election violence. So we are effectively having an election without the participation of 20% of the country. And for those of us who still believe in one Cameroon, who still believe that we need to get rid of the Biya government. That's clear. We have to get rid of this government. It is oppressive, it is violent, but we, as Cameroonians, can and should live together. We have a tendency of saying sometimes that the government is the #1 secessionist, because you cannot have part of your population so upset that they want to leave the country, and your answer is to behave as if nothing is going on and to go on about your business as usual.
This is a good point, because earlier I described Edwin as we were getting ready for the show as Cameroonian. Are you Cameroonian?
No, I am an Ambazonian. I have never been a Cameroonian because the arrangement in which these two very distinctive people came to be hasn't been completed. Let's start remembering that you cannot see in this part of the world English-speaking people who now call themselves Ambazonian and the French-speaking people who are called Cameroonians being forced into a union that should never have been. Do you know that the plebiscite, which was supposed to bring these two desperate people, has not been fully completed? So I'm very happy that we are having a member of Cameroon civil society, Madam Edith Kala, and a political party member to engage in the final solution. The final and permanent solution will be one that will have to address how these two countries come to become together. This is the way to solve this problem. Until we get back to getting to the roots of the problem.
You just want to wind the clock back and say French people are over here, French-speaking people are over here, English-speaking people are over here, and now we're done. That's what you want. And Kari is asking for unity.
I actually have a reference. I have a precedence to provide.
You cannot wind back that clock. While I totally understand Edwin's point, and he has, a historical point, the reality of our day-to-day living for the last 58 years is that Cameroonians from the northwest and southwest regions are married to Cameroonians in the other 8 regions. People own property across these regions. He who is speaking, he says he's an Ambazonian, but at the time, I don't know what nationality he has today, but when he left Cameroon, he carried a Cameroonian passport, he carried a Cameroonian ID.
That was passport of convenience, madam. You know that. That was a passport of convenience.
And we cannot today, in a situation where we have had catastrophic governance in our country for the last 58 years.
We are here to find a solution. You should not be participating in a process that is the cause of this problem. I would like to draw your attention to what is happening in Canada. Please remember that we have presidents. No, we have the Canada model. We have a model to apply.
So Karen, Edwin, meantime, just take a pause for a moment. Meantime, Ahmed, let me just bring you in here. We have this election that's coming up on Sunday, and there are repercussions from the violence because we have these two warring sections. We have an administration and then people who want to be separate from the administration in conflict with each other. What kind of election is it going to be?
Now, basically, Carl was talking about their party not participating in the election. And that has been the bane of opposition all over Africa and in most developing countries. The question people asked me, when I visited Cross River State last month, I was exchanging some ideas or views with some of the refugees. And I was asking one of them, are you willing to go back to Cameroon ahead of the elections? He said, going to what? And I said, going to vote. He said, nobody would be voting in that part of the country. I said, why? He said, first of all, there is threat of violence from both sides. And then the issue is, we want a solution, a political solution to this situation. We are ignored by the international community. And the opposition in Cameroon is not united in its quest to resolve this. And the separatists are actually demanding that things should walk their own way. Now, the problem here is, from the way I see it, the way it is now, the opposition is not united to have a common approach to deal with Paul Biya as president of Cameroon. And then you have this disunity also on the side of people who want a separate state. And how much attention is being paid to the struggle for Ambazonia by the international community? You will say not much attention is being paid to. Even the refugees we met were actually not properly looked after. So it's a very, very delicate situation. But the biggest problem is, will the election be allowed to continue in the Anglophone region? For me, the question is, the possibility of that election holding peacefully in that part of the country is actually very, very slim, simply because the Ambazonia separatists warned that they will not allow elections to hold there, and nobody is sure whether the Cameroon forces will also allow anybody to have any form of activity in that part of Cameroon. The refugees are telling us that they've been chased away and they've been asked not to go back to certain villages. Anybody found there will be considered as a terrorist.
I think what you're saying, Ahmed, is echoed here online. This is Niba, who says, it is not safe for any presidential candidate to campaign outdoors in Ambazonia because anyone could be hit by a stray bullet. If not, they could be targeted as a traitor or working for the government of Cameroon. So it doesn't feel safe to campaign anywhere around Ambazonia. But to highlight what this disunity that you mentioned looks like, because we're seeing it online as well, I also wanted to share this tweet. This is from Eni, who says, we are faced with two evils here, President Biya and you, the separatists. He's talking to people online. We choose the lesser evil, which is Biya. You will try, but you will never divide this country. Believe that. So, Edwin, of course, I'm going to give this one to you. This person, and there are a few others on the chain, believe that the lesser of two evils is the president who has been there for 7 terms.
This is what happened in a totalitarian society where they have lived with just 2 presidents since 1960. What else do they know in Cameroon? It is a selection process. What is happening is that they grew up thinking that they can impose their will on the English-speaking people. But the era of doing that is over, completely over. What you're talking to now is you're dealing with someone like me who is reasonable, who knows that there is a constitutional way of finding a permanent solution. And I'd like to draw your attention to the latest mechanism for bringing that permanent solution. We have the Green Tree Accord, in which Cameroon and Nigeria were signatories. And in that accord, you also have the United States, you have Germany, you have France and the United Kingdom. These are all under now international obligation to participate in the solution. So when you hear all this call for dialogue, it should be one that is associated with the word permanent solution, with the instrument given to that being the Constitution in which we were supposed to have implemented, which was not implemented. If that is brought into play, we will have clearly the solution out there. You remember that in the Republic of Cameroon.
Edwin, I think there are 2 different levels that we have to acknowledge. The person online who's talking about the lesser evil being Biya, I think we have only gotten to that situation because the Ambazonian movement decided to take up arms. I think it's very important for us to be honest. Amongst English-speaking Cameroonians, you have those who support a unitary state, who want to, they acknowledge that some rights, their rights are not respected and so on, but they want to stay with Cameroon exactly as it is today. You have many who believe in some form of autonomy for the different states in Cameroon. That is a federal state, different types of federalism that are proposed.
Ahmed wants to say something to you. Hold tight, Carl. Go ahead, Ahmed.
Somebody who asked me in one of the refugee camps, asked me, do you think that Paul Biya will allow some form of autonomy to the, to the Anglophone region of Cameroon? The question that is bugging their mind is that this is not going to happen. Going by the precedents of Paul Biya over the years, they feel that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you, Ahmed, that it's not going to happen by Paul Biya. I want to just mention the 3 different groups amongst English-speaking Cameroonians.
Referring to Cameroon as a source of the solution.
You have the Ambazonians.
We cannot ask the fox to guard the chicken house.
Please let me finish, Edwin. The first thing is that you have to acknowledge and respect that those 3 political opinions exist amongst English-speaking Cameroonians. 2 is that our common enemy is Biya. And this is the mistake that the Ambazonians have made. None of us, none of those 3 groups is going to find any solution as long as Mr. Biya is in power. And the fact that the Ambazonians decided to take up arms has complicated the situation further, because the population which is suffering today, people who are being killed.
Well,
let me just pick up in that pause, very helpful pause. Edwin said you cannot ask the fox to guard the chickens. But in the meantime, there are lots of people on the ground who are suffering. And Ahmed, you met some of those people. I know that you've been reporting in the region in just the last couple of days. Let me share just a little bit of some of your reporting. You can have a look at it here on my laptop, looking at some of the refugees coming out of this crisis.
Delta Eno and her 6 children join other refugees to move to a new settlement away from the Nigeria-Cameroon border. This is the family's 3rd relocation since they fled the fighting in southern Cameroon. None of the children has been to school since then.
We don't have peace in the house because the children worried us. Mommy, Daddy, what are we doing here? We are not more going to school. What are we doing here? Let's go back.
With no money and hope of returning to their former home anytime soon, she says their future is bleak. Even parents who could afford to hire private tutors for their children are giving up.
Well, it's the money that we saved that in our country before stepping down here. We managed to send them to school.
Now the savings is gone.
Ahmed, so you're seeing the impact of these warring factions on the ground in terms of refugees. What were they telling you? What kind of state were they in?
Scary stories. We've met, the first trip I met to Cross River State, we went to Obodu. There we saw a pregnant woman whose pregnancy was aborted, fighting for her life. She told me that she spent 8 days in the bush, and eventually when she crossed over into Nigeria, she lost her baby. And it was traumatic. We met another woman who lost her mind simply because of the trauma she went through. She talked about, the relations are talking about how the security forces stormed the village, killed a lot of people, including her husband, her children, her uncle, and some neighbors. So she ran, and the stories are actually very, very pathetic. And these are people who moved to several locations inside Nigeria. Thank God for them. What they're telling me is they were close to communities that really share the same language, same culture, and they took them in. It was a difficult moment for them at the start when they arrived in Nigeria, simply because there were no initial arrangements to receive that number of refugees into Nigeria. So before the international community and the NGO stepped in, a lot of people suffered. So the suffering continues, and at the moment, a lot of them are not even going to school.
I think, Ahmed, that was the point that I was trying to make, is that the Biya is a dictator, he is violent, and he is primarily responsible for the violence in this situation. There's no question about that. But the choice of the Ambazonians to also start using violence has ended up being the worst thing that could happen to the people that they claim to be fighting for, because they have created a situation of complete chaos in the northwest and southwest regions. They have created a situation where the population
it would be nice for us to speak about the solution. If you keep insisting about the Ambazonia causing the violence, that is patently unfair.
And
you know that is not right. The opposition has not been able to replace Biya for the last 40 years.
You've not achieved one single thing. What is the achievement for the price
there is a program, there's a process of achieving this one, but it is predicated on us going back to where this problem started. You are avoiding the source of the problem. And no doubt you'd only have an octogenarian president being selected on the 7th to run for the 7th term. Do you think that the opposition in Cameroon has any solution? They don't have any solution. For the last 70 years and counting, you guys have not been able to bring in any modicum of democracy in that country. It's because of the Anglophone
Edwin and Carl, I'm calling time. I'm just calling time out for now. If you're watching this, we're talking about Cameroon. They have elections coming up on Sunday. The president there is going for a 7th term, President Paul Biya. And meanwhile, there is a conflict going on between the president and also regions, the northwest and southwest regions of the Cameroon. And believe it or not, Edwin and Carr are both opposition voices, although it sounds like they're opposition with each other. Malika, go ahead.
I want to bring in this voice via Twitter. This is Cow, who says the government should recognize its failure to handle the crisis and call for a ceasefire, make sure all the perpetrators of human rights violations are made to pay for their misdeeds, and release all detainees. And only after that is done will our people accept a dialogue. So that is one view of how we move forward, how we push on from this. But there's also a video comment from someone. This is Terrence, who comes to us from the UK. He's a member of the Southern Cameroon's National Council out of the UK. And here's what he says.
I just want to make a few clarifications about a few things that the Western media and the people in the West, the mistakes they make about my country. One, the conflict in Southern Cameroon is often called an Anglophone crisis. I believe this is very wrong because one, it is not a crisis, it is a war. President Paul Biya of La République du Cameroon declared war on Ambazonia, and therefore we cannot call it any other thing other than a war. So it is not a crisis, it is a war, and we Ambazonians regard it as a war of independence.
So Ahmedi says this isn't just a conflict, this isn't just a crisis, this is a war. From what you've seen and those who are displaced and the refugees you've talked to, how do people feel about that point?
Well, a lot of people still feel exactly the same way. They feel that it's a war declared on them by the government of Cameroon simply because of the language barrier, the cultural barrier, and all that. Now, the problem now is finding a solution to this problem. How much international or global attention is being paid to this crisis? Not much. Two, who is the main beneficiary of the crisis? We have an opposition that has failed to unite to kick out Paul Biya over the past decades. And we also have a group, the Ambazonia separatist movement, that is fighting the Cameroonian forces, an organized security force, which is sometimes difficult to deal with. I understand their predicament. Earlier in the year, the Nigerian government arrested some of the leaders and handed over to the Cameroonian government, and they're still in detention. Many of them are still in detention. Now, why do they go? Why do they get their support? So it's a difficult question. The biggest beneficiary to all this is perhaps Paul Biya, because the opposition is divided, incidentally because the government intervened and made it so, and then you have a war which he can approach the international community to say that we have separatists in our midst who declared war on the state of Cameroon even before they were recognized as an independent state. Now, the other question is, going by the similar movements in the region, the Biafra movement, for example, we have one in Nigeria. Recently we saw what became of the Catalonia movement, the desire for independence in the Barcelona region of Spain, which of course did not work out very well. And then you have the Biafra, like I said. The question now is, how will the Ambazonia movement, how strong is that lobby, international lobby, to get their voices heard? And how strong is the opposition in Cameroon to withstand the pressures from the Paul Biya government? These are key issues that need to be
This is where we have the solution. We've just not been given the opportunity to explain it. Let me say, we are in the same team, Ms. Kawala. You remember that you've been struggling to get installed Democracy 101 since 1960. We only have 2 presidents. There has to be a reason for that. It's because this country is patently allergic to democracy as a result of what they know is a fraud that was at the outset of this creation of the country. How do we resolve it? We have precedents already set. You remember, there was how Canada treats the Quebec situation. They ended up having the 1987 Michel Accord. That was based on the constitutional framework. You should be open to that. Please, you cannot have it both ways. You cannot be pretending that you want to install Democracy 101 in Cameroon, and at the same time, you are conscious of the fact that freedom begets justice for everybody. So that is just one of it. Then I want to draw your attention to another solution that was done.
Edward and Carr and we're actually going to take these other solutions. We're going to take them online because we're almost out of time for this show. It's never enough for a half-an-hour stream show to talk about Cameroon. Never. Malika, what do you have?
Two comments on either sides. One from Inni, who says separatists should start by laying off their arms, allowing schools to reopen and stop their violence on us. Live on YouTube, we got this comment from Robert, who says the opposite. Ambazonians never took up arms until the president started killing them. So they had to defend themselves, and that is what they are doing.
And of course, Al Jazeera will be following the Cameroon elections coming up on Sunday very closely. You will also be able to see the reporting of Ahmed Idris. Kawala, thank you so much for being on the show. And Edwin Gang, it's never boring with you on board. Thank you very much indeed. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
See you online.